Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the huge Delhi liquor policy case. But here's the twist. We're not just rehashing the headlines. We're going to focus on a specific court judgment that took a hard look at the investigation itself, how the whole case was actually built from the ground up. So this case just exploded onto the national stage. It all started with this massive accusation of corruption, which led to a whole series of high-profile arrests. And I mean high-profile. It ended up with the first ever arrest of a sitting chief minister in India's history. And right at the heart of it all was this number, 44.54 crore rupees. The investigators alleged this was a kickback, that it was the proceeds of the crime, and that it was illegally funneled from Delhi to Goa. This figure, it became the absolute cornerstone of the entire prosecution. Well, as you can imagine, this all set the stage for a huge legal showdown. So the big question, the one we're really digging into, is this. After all the investigation, all the arrests, all the media frenzy, how did the case actually stand up when it got in front of a judge?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the scandal as it was originally presented to the public. Then we get to the court's bombshell judgment. This is a real turning point. After that, we'll put the evidence under the microscope, just like the court did. We'll also tackle that kingpin theory. And we'll wrap up with the court's final and, frankly, pretty startling verdict on the investigation itself.
Right, so the investigation was led by two of the country's biggest agencies, the CBI and the ED. They made a string of high-profile arrests and, they painted this picture of a massive conspiracy to rig Delhi's liquor policy for illegal cash. That was the narrative. But then, on February 27, 2024, everything changed. A court ruling came out that offered a completely different take on the whole thing. It wasn't just a minor disagreement. It challenged the very foundation of the prosecution's case. And the court did not mince words. The judgment called the case unsubstantiated. It said it failed to withstand judicial scrutiny. To put that in simple terms, the court found there wasn't even enough evidence to form a basic initial suspicion of guilt, what's called a prima facie case, let alone enough to actually prove it. So you have to be asking, how on earth did the court come to such a blunt conclusion? Well, it started by taking the prosecution's evidence and putting every single piece of it under a microscope. Now, a huge part of the case was built on testimony from people called approvers. It's a really important term to get. An approver is basically someone who was accused of the crime, who then flips and decides to testify for the prosecution. And usually, they do it in exchange for a pardon or a lighter sentence. And this is where the court found some major issues. For one, it pointed out a basic legal rule. You can't use the testimony of one accused person to back up the story of another accused person. It just doesn't work that way. The court also took a close look at the timeline of donations made by another key approver, noting he had sent crores to the BJP through electoral bonds after he was arrested and right around the time he became a witness for the prosecution. And that brings us back to that massive number, the money trail, remember? The prosecution's biggest claim was that over 44 crore rupees were illegally funneled from Delhi all the way to Goa. So what was the solid proof for this multi-crore transaction? According to the court judgment, the evidence boiled down to loose papers with pencil markings. That's it. Yeah, you can probably guess what the court thought of that. It found that these scribbled notes on loose bits of paper were completely unsubstantiated and refused to accept them as any kind of credible proof. But it gets even more interesting. The court then looked at a claim about hidden evidence. See, the CBI had submitted over 14,000 emails as part of their case, but it's what was buried deep inside that huge pile of data that really grabbed the judge's attention. The judge discovered that instead of clearly presenting all the legal opinions they had on the liquor policy, the CBI had buried the ones that actually gave the accused a clean shit. They were hidden in that massive data dump. The court had a name for this tactic: suppression by obscurity. Basically, hiding something in plain sight. Now, the prosecution didn't just allege a crime happened. They pointed to a kingpin, the chief minister, Arvind Kejriwal. So let's look at what the court's judgment said about that very serious and very specific allegation. One of the first things the court zeroed in on was the timing. A charge sheet, that's the formal police document with all the accusations. Well, in the first charge sheet, Kejriwal's name wasn't there. Second one, not there. Third one, still not there. His name only popped up for the very first time in a fourth, supplementary charge sheet.
And when the court dug deeper, it found that the CBI couldn't prove he'd attended any of the so-called conspiracy meetings. There was zero evidence he'd even met any of the co-accused during the time this conspiracy was supposed to be happening. The entire kingpin claim was hanging by the thread of a statement from just one single approver. Even though that approver claimed 10 or 12 other people were at the meeting, none of whom were questioned. And this is the really crucial part. The court didn't just make a ruling on whether the accused were guilty or innocent. No, it went a step further and delivered a sharp, direct verdict on the investigation process itself.
And this quote from the judgment is just stunning. The court said the agency seemed to have started with a preconceived narrative and then conducted a choreographed exercise to make the facts fit. In other words, it looked like they had decided on the conclusion first and then worked backward.
And this wasn't just talk. This damning assessment led to a final, very decisive action. The court ordered a departmental inquiry into the professional conduct of the CBI's lead investigating officer on this case. And all of this leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. What does it actually mean for our justice system when a court doesn't just disagree with the evidence, but concludes that the entire investigation seems to have been designed to fit a story rather than to find the truth? It really makes you think about the checks and balances that are supposed to guarantee a fair process for everyone.